arms towards the sun. You feel the warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive, and you don't have to be afraid of anything, cause you know the truth, and the truth is love, yes it is. Wasn't what they said to you, or anything that you learn from a book or from the news. It's not like that, cause it's a thing. It is something that you do. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Dib-on baby did alone. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Dib-on baby did love's the highest truth. Nothing could be higher than love, my friend.
Welcome to the Bassline, everyone. Adil Vezir is an old friend of mine. We met at Hunter College many years ago. He's a phenomenal illustrator, painter, sculptor, and furniture maker. Having lived in Harlem, Philadelphia, and now Ireland, he is originally from Azerbaijan. He is here to offer an alternative perspective on the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan that was discussed here on the Bassline, episode 23. Welcome to the Bassline, my friend. How is the weather in your part of the world?
How are you, Jeremy? It's good to hear from you. It's okay. We're expecting a little storm, but otherwise it's, typical Irish weather.
Okay. Before we get into our rich conversation here today, it is Bandcamp Friday. You can go to jeremiahhosea.com, Jeremiah Hosea, JeremiahHosea.com. Please buy the theme song to this show, Love's the Highest Truth, just for $1. If you want to buy it for $5 or $10, that would be lovely, but you don't have to. Just buy it for $1, and that would be great. And today, artists get all the profit through the Bandcamp interface. Also, please check out my Substack. I have a couple of pretty dynamite articles that are just sitting on 29 likes. I would love for someone to just roll up on my Substack and just click like and get me up to 30 on those two, and actually share those articles. And please help share the word about that Substack and about this program, The Bassline. We have incredible guests lined up for weeks on end. We're going to have the sensational Bobby Ann Cox. We're going to have Dr. Toby Rogers the week after that. We just have some great guests lined up. So, I'm doing my best here, trying to share information, trying to deliver great guests. And we have been doing this this is our 34th week in a row. So if I'm nothing else, am I not consistent? I've been here. I've been in the studio delivering. And as well as I can, I pre-produce this program in terms of doing research and preparing the questions and trying to organize the discussion as well as possible. Now, before we get into the heart of today's discussion, which is, again, a return to the Armenia-Azerbaijan discussion, I want to hear from you, my friend Adil. What were your observations as it pertains to COVID in your part of the world where you reside now? Because this is a medical freedom focused show, and we can't miss out on an opportunity to get a perspective from another part of the world. This is actually, in our worldliness, this is our second Zoom show where we were connected with Ireland, because we also had, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, Adil, but the outstanding Ivor Cummins from Ireland, brilliant Irish fellow who was a previous guest. But tell us where you are in Ireland, if you could. I know you're kind of in a rural, remote kind of area. And tell me how you experienced the manufactured crisis, as we refer to it here on the Bassline, which was COVID-19, or Convid, as we call it.
Well, thank you for asking. I certainly had an unusual and maybe unique experience of the COVID. I think if having been in Ireland for about nearly 6 years now, I've moved here in 2018 from Philadelphia. At one point, I sold my house and quit my job and moved my whole family over here to Ireland because, my wife is from here and we're in West Clare, which is kind of like a very rural and westernmost part of Ireland. We live pretty close to the ocean. And basically, the whole idea of moving over here was just kind of to create a little better environment for our kids to grow up closer to their grandparents who were sick at the time, and also just to be able to kind of give them a different perspective and just remove ourselves from the typical the rat race, so to speak, that were involved in America for so many years. They just felt like it wasn't going anywhere. We're just stuck in the same kind of a rut, going, from 9 to 5, and then back to this. It was just kind of the same thing, and we just wanted to kind of change the environment and our worldview a little bit. And so we took a chance and we moved out here to Ireland, and I purchased a old, kind of a rundown build, a house here by the ocean, and spent the entire COVID pretty much restoring the place, with my family. And we're lucky enough that we're able to have certainly a certain degree of seclusion, which was, I guess, highly coveted during the COVID times, because I can imagine being in a dense urban environment, a lot of people had real hard time because avoiding public places or trying to find any kind of peace or solitude, considering the amount of pressure that was put on isolation and giving people no room for there wasn't really anywhere to go. Just it felt like the cities, for me, one of the reasons for us moving was because it just felt like cities were a little bit of a entrapment in some ways, and if I really was stuck in this crisis situation, I wouldn't really be able to provide anything for my family or provide any defense or any kind of a food safety or any kind of a atmosphere for that. So that was one of the motivations for us to move to Ireland. And I guess when we came here, we kind of experienced that right as the COVID hit. And it was kind of unusual for me, to say the least, because the atmosphere here, it was one of the first kind of test grounds where the COVID started to be introduced into the kind of public psyche as this looming threat, and everyone just basically jumped on board. I think there's something about 94 to 95% compliancy within the Irish population for the vaccinations, for the doses, first, second, and third booster doses, which I personally, and me and my family, we abstained from. We just kind of felt like, not because I have anything against vaccinations per se, my kids are vaccinated standard, and I myself am vaccinated from childhood, I'm sure, but this just felt like a bit of a rush job, and it felt a little bit of a kind of like unknown territory because the delivery system for this vaccination was very new, and also the methods of mRNA vaccination were kind of untested still, seemed like, and there was just a lot of risk and questions at hand, and I just didn't feel like the crisis was as big as they kind of were portraying it on news and media and radio, and wherever you turned, you were just constantly bombarded by this threat and this overarching kind of a fear that was being driven into people. And I felt like, lucky enough, we were far enough away from civilization, so to speak, that we're able to kind of, have that space to look back and just be like, well, do we really need to go through all this stuff? And just, let's just wait and see what happens, sort of, And then as the time moved on, and I didn't see people just, falling over on the streets and dying in mass numbers. So I felt it was like a lot of it was just kind of, exaggerated. Seemed like we even eventually, after about 2 years, I mean, I even got COVID, and it felt about 3 days of being achy and not particularly, anything really to talk about. It was just kind of very mild, and I didn't think the whole kind of the whole process just felt so forced. It kind of reminded me a lot about kind of growing up in Soviet Union, where it was like something about mass compliance and being able to kind of follow this mass hysteria that kind of took over, and people were fighting each other for toilet papers, and I mean, and it was just kind of like nobody was really thinking straight anymore. It was just the atmosphere of fear. So I wanted to kind of step away from that and just try to have a sober analysis of the whole situation. And I decided that it wasn't really anything that I really wanted to participate in necessarily. And luckily enough, I had the space and the time not to have to, be in any kind of public sphere, work. I don't have to travel anywhere necessarily. I'm kind of self-employed sculptor. So it's kind of felt, and I had a project in hand, I was restoring the house. So didn't feel like, I was really involved as much as I could understand people being in the cities who have to take subways and go to, busy places, public places. And I think the hysteria must have been, I don't know, unbearable to really succumb to the pressure. I think was, very easily understandable how people would be so easily persuaded because, considering that, the mortality rate was relatively small considering, the scale of the problem, and I don't know, I just felt like there was a little bit of there was definitely some kind of a program going on here, and the amount of data gathering that resulted in this, from being able to track your friends, your on the phone associates, where you've been in initial stages of this thing was really kind of just ridiculous. It just kind of felt like an almost cartoonish exaggeration of of a crisis, because in a real crisis, if I saw, real, results of like mass pandemic or epidemic level stuff, or, like people would be falling dead in the streets, it'd be like the Black Plague. I'd be the first one to line up to get the vaccines, but I just didn't see that, and I knew some people that were sick, there were elderly people that were getting affected, but we didn't know what was causing it necessarily to the same extent that, how much faith did I really have in the people that were telling me these things, so I didn't to begin with. So I guess we're kind of chose to self-isolate, and we're lucky enough to do so just before the pandemic really hit, so that was kind of my experience of last few years.
That's a good summary. Let me ask you quickly, so when you had COVID, did you experience unusual symptoms, or was it something that you would just call being under the weather, and because they said it was
just
COVID?
Mostly having like body aches for about 2 or 3 days. My wife got it; she was about the same. But I've had like worse colds, or stomach viruses.
Did it feel unusual? Did it feel unusual? Did it feel like a novel virus, or would you have just said, "Oh, we got under the weather," but because they were saying COVID, we have to call it COVID now because we're sick during this time period? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did get tested. Like I tested those kits and everything to see, and it showed positive. But I guess it didn't feel like particularly, it felt a little more, I guess, for me. And I know that as the virus was mutating and changing, I kind of got it at the, end of the process. In the beginning, I'm sure it was a little bit different experience for a lot of the people who did experience it. But for me, it was mostly, just body aches and a little bit of being unwell. I don't think it was that different. Like, had I not been tested for it, I wouldn't necessarily know that if it's any different cold. We all had minor colds and stomach viruses and rotavirus and whatever, and a lot of that was much worse. I felt like by comparison, it's like, so I guess it just depends on individual experience. Maybe I don't know. I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I was much more scared of the vaccine than I was of the virus for some reason, because it just felt like, the unknowns here, the factor of the unknown was too big in this substance that were still being tested, that people were injecting in mass without question. You know what I mean? And now there was a lot of new information that was kind of developing as it was going. Like, for example, a lot of the injection methods of that they were using without aspartame. What do you call it?
Aspirating, without aspirating.
Aspirating, yeah, right. The aspiration of for example, like a lot of people are not familiar with that at all, and a lot of the injections ended up going into the bloodstream rather than the muscle. So it was kind of like, this is the new information that kept popping up. So every day there was like, they kept changing the goalpost, moving the goalpost. And it was like, first it was just get the vaccine, and then get the booster, and the second booster, and the third booster. And then it was the elders and the children, and it was like the dogs and the cats. And I was like, where's this stop?
Can you believe they actually,
there has to be a choice, individual choice given to you with real information available. But when you're just bombarded by various hysterical kind of news media outlets, kind of pumping the same message over and over and over and over into people's heads, of course you're going to comply eventually. It's like, and I was lucky enough to not necessarily be immersed in that environment so much, being so far removed from I guess maybe the American news media and just media in general, and just being kind of not in the middle of an urban settlement. So I guess that was kind of my safety zone there, maybe. But and I don't know. I just felt like that whole. I was lucky enough to kind of have the choice, or to be able to afford to have the choice. I can see how a lot of people didn't have the choice. If you're traveling, or if you're working in public schools or public sector, you would be given no choice. You know what I mean? There's literally the pressure to get the vaccine was enormous. Even here too, like there's always, at some point I just didn't talk about it because you always felt like people were self-policing now, and it was just kind of, the pressure to, tell each other exactly, like everybody became a chemistry expert all of a sudden and a doctor, like, so it's
Every
just,
bartender,
I
right?
don't know. I was very mistrustful always of any kind of a mass group events, such as, like I said, growing up in Soviet Union, it felt very much fabricated in many ways. And that's kind of what was, put me off to begin with. Not that I don't believe in the science of things. I just, I'm very scientifically minded in many ways, but I just, in this particular case, I just thought I'd proceed with caution if you can, like, and a lot of people just jumped on board and became the believers. And there were moments you're not a believer, you get ostracized, and you get shunned from the, community, like,
Yeah.
so that kind of felt a bit weird, so that how people can be turned on each other so easily. It was very much like, it felt, how, I don't know, it just felt strange. I didn't really trust a lot of it. So,
Well, I'm really glad you were suspicious, my friend, because I think those shots have turned out to be really bad news, and I think we don't even know how bad.
Now we can see from all the data how much, there's new data shows, like all the adverse reactions to it, all the sudden death syndrome, the heart enlargement. There's so much new information that we didn't have the very first year, where people just lined up and took the shot and the donut, and whatever, and then it just didn't feel like there was any kind of a real, the decision wasn't based on real information. It was a lot of times
Right.
we just kind of went along with whatever they told us, and that people, that just didn't feel right, so.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say earlier too, I mean, for all this science stuff, did you see they actually, I mean, it almost is unbelievable. It's like literally impossible. But I mean, do you know that they injected zoo animals with this stuff? And some of the zoo animals have died suddenly. Like, why would it occur to you to give like a giraffe a coronavirus shot for a human?
Unreal. Some of the stuff was just unreal, and you could see how any kind of agenda can now pass on a global scale without any much of a resistance, and 95% of the population will just line up, and if they're I mean, we could only imagine in a worst case scenario what this could be implemented, this type of technology and tools, and and the complete power that the pharmaceutical companies suddenly had over everybody's movements and lives and decision making, and it was just unreal. Like it felt like almost Orwellian, almost. I don't know.
Oh yeah, seriously. Well, those are some great observations.
At this point,
Yeah, no, seriously. Like, there's that meme that says "Make Orwell or fiction again," or "Make 1984 fiction again."
Kind of surreal, yeah.
So let's get into this return. I'll say to this discussion on Bassline episode 23, which I referenced previously. We heard a depiction of the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan that described Azerbaijan as the aggressor. So is this inaccurate, first of all? Would you claim that Armenia was the aggressor, or is there some sort of third-party explanation that you should enlighten us with?
Sure. Well, it's a good question, Jeremy, and it's a complicated question, but at best. But I'll try to shed some light on it best I can. And I think when you classified Azerbaijan as aggressor, that's absolutely not correct, because if Azerbaijan was the aggressor, there wouldn't be 4 UN resolutions declaring Armenia the aggressor and demanding the withdrawal of the troops Armenia has placed, not just in Nagorno-Karabakh region, which was populated by Armenian, like small population of Armenia, which is about 100,000 people, but the 7 regions around Nagorno-Karabakh, which are pretty massive regions, and they have populations of nearly 100,000 in each of those regions. And those people were ethnically cleansed, and all of those territories were taken over by Armenian military units and by Armenian nationalists that have created a separatist organization on top of Azerbaijan's international territory. This is not disputable. You can look this up anywhere. Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and sovereignty was violated, and 20% of it was occupied up until 2020, where in 2020 it did take military force, and in 44 days managed to recapture the 7 occupied territories and the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which was historically Azerbaijani, and ethnically there was an Armenian population living there, but that does not mean that it belongs to Armenia by any means. There was already, Azerbaijan has not invaded Armenia, has it? If you look it up, show me one place on the map where we've bombed Yerevan or any of the border towns of Armenia, or none of those things happened. However, Armenian militia, which was based in Nagorno-Karabakh, which they self-declared a country suddenly. It's a small region within a country, and suddenly declares itself a country. To be a country, you have to be accepted and accepted by all of the countries in the EU, UN, and other Security Council and such organizations. Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh as they call it, was not recognized by anyone in the world, including Armenia. So how could we recognize a country that Armenia themselves do not recognize? For 30 years, they've built fortifications, tunnels, trenches, bunkers, military line that was considered impenetrable. It's called the Ohanyan Line. And we managed to penetrate that line and retake our villages and our towns that were under occupations for 30 years. We have 1 million refugees in Azerbaijan from the 7 surrounding regions and from Armenia itself that were ethnically cleansed. Now, why should, those people suffering and what they've lost and what they have suffered should be considered completely irrelevant just so that 100,000 Armenian nationals living inside Azerbaijan could be happy and have their own country? I mean, that just makes no sense. That land called Caucasus was historically occupied by many, many countries and many, many empires throughout the history, and there were a lot of different tribes that lived in it. Azerbaijan is a multi-ethnic country and has many representatives of various nationalities, such as Lezgins, Talish, Udins, Kurds, Russians, Armenians. There were a lot of different nationalities that lived in it. It's primarily Turkic speaking. It's Azerbaijani, being represented about 75, maybe 80% of the population. But there's a lot of indigenous populations that exist within Azerbaijan in various regions that speak their own language, they have their own culture, and they're fully respected and integrated within the society. Armenia, on the other hand, is a monoethnic state represented mostly of Armenians, and it's extremely nationalistic in its origin and in its politics. That it has territorial claims against all of its neighbors because they are obsessed with this concept of ancient Armenia, which may or may not have existed thousands of years ago on the similar lands. And they would like to take a part of Turkey. They want a part of Georgia. They want part of Azerbaijan. They want part of Iran. If they really, it's like there's 3 million Armenians living in Armenia, and there's 150 million Turks living all around them. 40 million being in Iran, 10 million being in Azerbaijan, and 150 million being in Turkey. I mean, what do you think is going to happen after we've occupied a territory of an independent sovereign country? I mean, of course, there's going to be repercussions. And for 30 years, we tried to negotiate with Armenian separatists. We tried to give them all benefit of the doubt, and because we wanted to return at least some of those territories, and they refused. Even when the war broke out, they were given guarantees of security, and they were offered Azerbaijani passports and citizenship if they chose to remain within that particular mountainous territory. But it's if you look at it on the map, I mean, anybody who wants to take a look at it in Google Maps and see where exactly is this place located, you can see it very clearly. It's located within Azerbaijan. We have not crossed Armenian border and invaded anything in Armenia. We were merely taking back the territories that were occupied by separatists.
Right. Okay. That's pretty thorough, everything you said right there. Now, it was mentioned in the previous program that Stalin had arbitrarily handed over Armenian territory to Azerbaijan. Is this incorrect?
I think that's a false statement in many ways. And if I've seen the document that refers to, and I've seen it in Russian, and I've read it in Russian, and nowhere does it mention anything about Stalin giving anything away, because those lands were Azerbaijani way before Stalin was ever born. In the Turkmenchai Treaty, all of Caucasus was seceded to Russia. It's treaty was in 1828. It was signed between Iran and the Qajar dynasty, which was a Turkish dynasty who ruled Iran at the time, and the Russian Tsarist forces. And the Russians won, and they've annexed all of Caucasus. This has included Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, and Karabakh. And basically, they signed this treaty, and everything on one side of the river went to Russians, and everything on the other side of the river stayed within Iran. So how could he, and the people they've negotiated these contracts they were kingdoms, or khaniyats as they called them. There were Nakhchivan Khaniyat, there was a Karabakh Khaniyat. They were ruled by individual kings. These kings were Azerbaijani because we have all the documentations for this. We have their graves, we have their tombstones, the cities, we know who built them. There is no question about it. Stalin had nothing to give. He was from Caucasus himself. You know exactly that area was like a mosaic quilt patchwork of various different tribes living on the same land. There was 100,000 people maybe living in one little area, which were basically Armenians, but they lived on Azerbaijani territory. A lot of them speak Azerbaijani, just as there were a lot of Azerbaijanis living in Armenia, close to 400,000 of them that spoke Armenian and Azerbaijani. And historically, it wasn't like black and white the way they try to portray it. It was really a mixed, a rug of various tapestry of all the different tribes that were living in that area. So no particular tribe, especially Armenians, can claim the sole right to own that place. I mean, it's kind of like, it's like we had a house. We all lived together in the Soviet Union. There was different countries. There were 15 different people living in this country. The Soviet Union collapsed, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, they tried to use any means necessary to maintain any kind of control or grip of power over the Caucasus, and they did this by inciting ethnic conflicts. They incited two in Georgia and Abkhazia and Ossetia. They incited one in Moldova and Transnistria, and they incited one in Karabakh. Basically, Azerbaijanis and Armenians have been living together for thousands of years in one form or another, under one kingdom or another, and they were just fine. But suddenly, just as the Soviet Union collapsed, these people had territorial claims against each other. I mean, that's the small farming communities of Armenians living in mountainous regions of Azerbaijan were mostly doing farming and animal husbandry. They couldn't put together a military force, with hundreds of tanks and sonars and, the artillery and millions of mines that have been buried in the ground. How could it be possible? Of course, there was government of Armenia and other forces involved, especially the diaspora in America is very strong. The Armenian diaspora in America is particularly strong, and they've been funding this since the end of the, Soviet Union. And a lot of the American Armenians who went over there and participated.
They all live in Glendale, California, I've heard.
Yeah, they would, like people like Monty Melkonyan, who's an American Armenian who's basically joined a terrorist organization called Asala. If you look it up, Armenians have dozens of terrorist organizations, officially designated terrorist organizations, which are nationalist. They went around assassinating Turkish diplomats. They went around committing terrorist activities in subways in Baku, in Moscow, in France, in Lebanon. And these are the people who, for nationalistic ideals and for purposes of nothing more than, chauvinism, nationalism, went to another country's borders, crossed the border, and ethnically cleansed existing people who were there. When people speak in Armenia about, the poor suffering people of Artsakh or whatever they want to call it, they completely ignoring the fact that there was the other people. Who did they were separated from? Like Azerbaijan couldn't go and invade Karabakh because it was already part of Azerbaijan. They're the ones who want to separate. They're the ones who took up arms. They're the ones who attacked our villages and conducted multiple massacres, which are well documented and well recorded. And now we have actually, basically disassembled that military junta, which is basically funded by foreign diaspora and Armenian nationalism, and partially, who knows, probably Russians too. Because just to maintain levels of control over Azerbaijan and Armenia, I think at the end of the day, you have to see who's really winning in this situation. Azerbaijan managed to, reconsolidate itself after 30 years, because when the Soviet Union was collapsing, it was in no position to defend those lands. It was not interested in having a war. Why would Azerbaijan was not ready for war? It was barely the power struggle in the capital itself was hard enough. And then in 1991, Russians sent troops into Baku and they conducted massacres there, and it was called the Black January. And just to make the point at home, I mean, there was so many of these dark events, and part of my family is refugees as well. My grandmother, my aunts, a lot of my cousins and uncles, they were all had to flee their homes. Our village has been destroyed. We have 600 villages that have been completely erased. There used to be 67 mosques in that region. Only 2 remained. The rest of them were used as pigsties, and they were desecrated completely. So I don't know what these people are going on about, saying who's the aggressor here? How could these people that love this land so much in 30 years haven't built anything there? Since Azerbaijan took over in 2020, there's been all the roads reconstruction, there's been airports built, the cities have been rebuilt, the villages are being restored, and millions of people are planning to return to their homes. Those people's rights have to be respected, and territorial integrity and sovereignty of Azerbaijan also has to be respected. It's not up for negotiations for a handful of separatists to just take up arms and decide for us where our borders are. This is an international matter. It's a matter of international law, and when you apply all those factors in here, basically, what happened is that, 30 years ago in the first Karabakh war, they managed to secure a certain piece of territory within Azerbaijan and 7 surrounding regions. 30 years later, Azerbaijan has built a new military force and a new government, and it's been flush with petrodollars, so it was able to reconquer those territories back and reclaim its full territorial integrity. Now, what happens to the 100,000 Armenians that lived on Azerbaijani soil? They were offered citizenship and full rights and guaranteed security. They refused, and they were given a safe corridor and a passage out of Nagorno-Karabakh into Armenia, which already exists. If you don't like that, you don't want to live in Azerbaijan, there's already Armenia, you can live there. It's like, not like, why is there has to be a second Armenia built on top of Azerbaijan? That I don't understand. It's like, they can claim whatever historic right you want, but they really talk about ancient history, and we can't really be. There's a lot of speculation there, and there's a lot of false facts and fabricated history, and for 600 years Armenians lived as part of the Ottomans, no problem. Before that, they were part of the Persian Empire and the Mongol Empire and the Russian Empire, and everywhere is just fine. But now in Azerbaijan, they can't have a passport and live like normal people. I think this whole idea that these two people are incompatible and they cannot coexist together is false, as we have places like Georgia and in Russia where these two communities do live next to each other and they respect each other and they can coexist just fine. But as long as there has to be no any kind of claims against your neighbors, and Armenia cannot make territorial claims on Azerbaijani soil based on some obscure historical facts. Like this is that's basically what the cause of it is. And I think that there's a lot of resentment towards the Turks that Armenians have due to the events of 1915, which have nothing to do with Azerbaijan. This is between them and Ottoman Turkey and the collapse of the Ottomans, and there was a lot of the weaponization that went on back then of the Armenian community to oppose the Ottomans was also a factor, which I think is a lot of these conflicts were instigated from outside of Armenia. They were instigated by England and by Russia and possibly by certain other forces at play here, because there's really 3 main players in the Caucasus, and that's Russia, Iran, and Turkey. And all these little countries in between, they're kind of, trying to walk a very fine line, walk a balanced line between these 3 superpowers sort of in that region. So for, it's not really this whole romanticized notion of the freedom fighters in the Caucasus who are going to, be bad Azerbaijanis and take back their, holy, sacred, whatever lands. I mean, that's nonsense. Realistically, there's 1 million refugees from that land, and this war has caused nothing but grief and sadness for Armenian community and Azerbaijani community. I mean, they've lost thousands of young men to this war, just as we have lost thousands of young men in this war. And I think it's to continue it and to kind of want to continue any kind of a new war. They keep trying to, there's forces in Armenia that definitely want to restart another war, and they're getting weapons now from France and Greece and India, and they're trying to re-weaponize. They're going to go back and take, and it's none of that's going to work. Like there's going to be at the end of the day, no matter all conflicts, people have to get at a table and sign a piece of paper. That piece of paper was signed. It was signed in 2020 by Nikol Pashinyan, Aliyev, and Putin. And in that agreement, Armenia has agreed to withdraw all of its military forces from Azerbaijani territory and to, allow a corridor from Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan region, which is another region that's kind of now being disputed. And there's a lot of these little subtleties that most people who are not aware of the geography and the complex history and the ethnic relations in that part of the world, just it completely, I don't know, goes over their heads. And so I can sit here and mention names and dates and all these things, but none of that's going to make a difference because, what's done is done, so to speak. The war has come and gone multiple times. And I don't know I'm just hoping that there won't be a third one,
Right. So, my politics pretty well. I'm an anti-imperialist. I'm an anti-war activist. I'm pretty distrustful of nation states in general.
Sure.
What's your opinion of your assessment of the Azerbaijani government without getting you in any kind of trouble? We don't want you on a watch list or
I'm
something.
certainly not affiliated with any government organization. I'm speaking purely my own opinions. I'm an artist, independent, and like I said, I live in Ireland. But I was in Azerbaijan recently. I was actually there a few weeks ago visiting family and stuff, and I can tell you, basically, by comparison to a lot of the places in former Soviet Union, Azerbaijan is doing very, very well in the sense that streets are clean, it's super safe, there's security, there's people are, there's there's no like homelessness the way you see in America. There isn't any. There is certainly it's an authoritarian state by some of the definitions, but you know, you have to understand something. We're a small country of 10 million people in pretty much that's been in the state of war for the last 30 years. There's such expression as you can't change horses mid-race, you know. So for Azerbaijan there really is no great opposition either, because people are on board with the current policies of the current Azerbaijani regime, because they were hired to restore the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, and they fulfill that role. So people are on board, and they're taking care of the economy really well. And of course, there's some degree of, you know, things. Not you can't please everybody, and there's things about the things can get better, of course. But look, I mean, where is it an example of a great democracy in this world? Is America an example of great democracy? I don't think so. I mean, like, look at the state of your politics. I mean, look at anywhere else in the world. Where can we bring up a perfect example to compare it to? I mean, so, you know, it's like saying, are there good crocodiles? I mean, certainly no. I mean, the crocodiles they have to eat, you know, and like, there's no good crocodiles or bad crocodiles, you know. It's like there just are. They have a job to do. Every state and state leader has one interest, and that's to maintain the interest of its own country and its own people, and guarantee their security and safety, you know. So and whatever means and forms that takes, that's what it is, you know. So I can't really say that, you know, Azerbaijani current government is a bad government, or it certainly is not. I don't think so. By comparison to, you know, you certainly have a large amount of freedom of speech, and if you need to, you know, there's certainly some opposition, I'm sure, but I don't think that in general right now he's just very popular, and I think that, you know, it would be very hard for, you know, anybody to create an opposition to his rule at this moment. Because
and tell us the name of the president, please.
Ilham Aliyev, and he's a son of the former president Heydar Aliyev, who was a, you know, former KGB general and a part of a Soviet elite class that was ruling the Soviet Union at the time, before it was, you know, separated into pieces. So there's definitely a political dynasty there. But look, there's a political dynasty everywhere you look. For example, look at the Clintons, the Obamas, and you can have, you know, the George Bushes. It's all a family business there. You know, it's like there isn't anything unusual about that. Like in a lot of the countries, there's certainly nepotism exists, corruption exists, all these things exist. But, you know, like literally, it's like, you know, where is it perfect? You know, show me a perfect place, you know. So that's kind of what I have to say about that. You know, I mean, I think it's got a long way to go, but I think it is the progress it has done in 30 years is nothing but remarkable. It's unprecedented, if anything.
So yeah, I saw Aliyev. He spoke recently. I think maybe a couple weeks ago, in March at some point. He was making comments in reference to peace accords with Armenia. Is that underway at the moment? Do you know? And also in general, what is your hope in general for the future in terms of peace being able to be achieved on a lasting basis?
Right. I mean, certainly that's the hope, that ultimately all this bloodshed and everything would, you know, wouldn't be a continuous kind of a vicious circle. It would just kind of end at one point, and these two communities can coexist and create a new kind of a landscape there. But I think there's definitely a lot of pressure from Azerbaijani side to have Armenia sign the peace agreement, because there's difference right now. I mean, the peace agreement basically, you know, means that we respect your borders, you respect our borders, and we agree, you know, that not to have to, you know, squabble over some couple of villages over there or something. You know what I mean? Like so basically, Armenia is still hesitant to sign this peace accord, because there's about 3 or 4 villages that are being disputed on the border right now or something, and they're trying to make that into an issue. And there's a lot of anti-Pashinyan forces in Armenia who do not want necessarily to have peace, because it ensures them maintaining certain kind of a, you know, presence in the political power struggle there. And Pashinyan himself was elected by a popular movement. So this is one of the Soros projects, and he was popular movement of the people that kind of elected him. So for them to suddenly, you know, but even though he lost the war, he managed to maintain, his grip on power. But yet the peace is still elusive. I mean, in 2020, when the agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia was signed, Azerbaijan allowed the people that were in Armenia to stay there, and they stayed there for over 3 years. but with continuing provocation and the border skirmishes and continuing buildup of the military forces and mining of the territory, it became impossible. So in 2023, there was a one-day operation which basically hit all of the military targets that remained in Karabakh, and after that, there was, the Armenian Artsakh project was basically finished. And a lot of the people in Armenia themselves, there's two different Armenias you have to understand. There's like Karabakh Armenians, which existed for 30 years, which created this little de facto pseudo state, and then there's the actual country of Armenia. So there's 100,000 in one place and 3 million people in the other, and then these 3 million people have been funding, supporting, emotionally, physically, financially their brethren in Azerbaijan and their struggle for independence and whatever they want to call it. But reality is it has taken a toll on Armenian society as well, and a lot of them are sick of it. A lot of them are sick of sacrificing their sons to go fight in the front lines in Azerbaijan. Because that's basically, it's an occupationist war. They're not defending their territories; they're occupying our territories, and that's a fact. You can look this up. They can portray it any other way they want it, but legally, Azerbaijan and Karabakh is Azerbaijan. It's Azerbaijani recognized territory by all countries in EU. So that's pretty much that. They can call it whatever they want. They can, say what they want, but it doesn't change the fact that that's what it is. Now, as far as the peace process goes, I'm certainly hoping that, if there is no further instigation from, Armenian, foreign forces such as France or US or a couple of other countries that are basically not interested in peace process, because for them, that would render that area, not very, you can't really meddle with anything then if there's no conflict, it's just kind of, everybody's peaceful and happy, and there's nothing to do, they can't engage in any kind of a meaningful way, but the result of this war caused Armenia to be, neglected from all the economical and developmental projects in the area, such as the oil pipelines and the roads and transportation routes. So they basically found themselves isolated, and their only allies in the area was Iran and Russia. And, this is their traditional allies, you tell me, like, these are the people that the U.S. is supporting who happen to have the same allies as Iran and Russia. It's kind of paradoxical. So in the meantime, Azerbaijan does have strong allies in the region, and the Turkey guarantees the security. And I think the only people that can truly guarantee security of Armenia is Azerbaijan. And sooner they sign the peace accord with Azerbaijan, the sooner Armenia can prosper and people can put this horrible war behind them.
Okay, very good. So you gave us a pretty thorough overview there. If anyone would like to ask a question or make a point, of course, relevant to what we've discussed here, please call 888-874-4888. That's our live on the air line, 888-874-4888, if you'd like to join the conversation and talk to my friend Adil Vezir. So in the meantime, hopefully someone will call in and make a good point. But please tell me, Adil, and tell us all how people can follow your artwork, how people can support your artwork, and where people can see your work and be aware of it.
Thanks for the promo. Well, I do primarily, since I've been in Ireland, I've mainly focused on bronze sculptures. And since I live so close to the coast, a lot of my bronze work is around marine-themed animals and animal type of sculpture. So you can see my work at www.adilvezir.com. It's ADILVEZIR. And it's adilvezir.com. And that's most of my bronze work. And I've been doing a little bit of stained glass lately, just experimenting with that. And you can see some of that work on Instagram. It's the same thing, Adil_Vezir. So, if you look me up on internet, you pretty much find something I've made. I work in a bunch of different mediums, and it changes from season to season, So.
Very good. So, yeah, guys, please check out his work. He's an incredible artist. Like I said, illustrator, painter, sculptor, just generally just a great artist. So I want to also mention for folks, as far as the medical freedom movement goes, our guest last week, Dr. Kat Lindley, is hosting a weekly Twitter space, it seems. Every Wednesday night, she's giving updates in regard to these extra governmental agreements that are going on that are being signed behind our backs with the World Health Organization and the United Nations and so on and so forth. She's really one of the people at the forefront of that discussion, along with, of course, our other previous guest, Dr. Merrill Nass. And like I've said to you guys before, I'm not one to tell you should get on social media, because it's great to not be on social media, but there are legitimate connections being made on Twitter. You can connect with very important people in the medical freedom movement, like Dr. Kat Lindley. Dr. Mary Talley Bowden has been relentless. She was featured on this program, episode 24, and there have been more legal developments since that program, and I call her, the unstoppable MTB, Mary Talley Bowden, because there's some folks that are really taking initiative here, folks. So I'm a big believer that when people step up and take the initiative, we should support them. Sort of like on a basketball court, if one of the players on your team has the hot hand, well, keep feeding them the ball, keep scoring those buckets when we have the chance. The number here again is 888-874-4888. If you have any questions for my guest, Adil Vezir. We're talking about Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's a discussion that you frankly never hear mentioned in our media, right? It's just one of these things that it's considered a non-event to the American news consumer. It's almost not
relevant enough.
Yeah, and it's amazing that we could be so perfectly sequestered from some of these events of international importance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal. So I guess we don't have any calls. Do we have any calls, Dylan? No calls. So I guess you guys are too scared to weigh in on this subject.
Don't test.
I understand there's a lot of information that was laid out, so it'd be almost, you'd have to be very thoughtful, I understand, to formulate an interesting question, considering everything that's been laid out. But we do have 8 minutes to go if anyone wants to jump in there.
It's certainly a complicated subject, and I don't think we even skimmed the surface, to be honest. If you really get into some of the nuances of that region, Caucasus is one of the most ethnically diverse and linguistically diverse places on earth, in a small area, size of one of the American states. There's literally hundreds of languages and different cultures that have been living there for millennia, and they have so many different influences coming from everywhere from starting from Macedonia, Alexander the Great, to Mongolia, Genghis Khan, Russia, Tsars, you name it. They all have been there and influenced that region on some level. So it creates a very unique kind of a place.
Yeah, and I can't believe I failed to mention so far that Adil is the one who introduced me to the work of G.I. Gurdjieff, who is also from Azerbaijan. He's from Baku, is that correct?
Well, he's from Caucasus, and at the time I think he's actually, oddly enough, he's Greek and Armenian himself. So it just goes to show you that even though I have all this strange history with the Armenians, I'm certainly not, gonna judge anybody based on that alone. And I think it's not a nationalistic thing, because I do like the work of Gurdjieff. I used to, at least, be much more interested in it. But it didn't stop me from certainly studying it. The fact that he was half Armenian, So.
Yeah, I think it's totally fascinating stuff. I mean, I think he's quite a brilliant fellow, and it's quite worthwhile to check out his cosmology.
I think over time I've kind of, I think when I was younger, I was much more inspired or maybe influenced by his work, maybe. But older I get, I think, it becomes one of the things. It's not so much as the only kind of a interesting thing from the Caucasus, but I've discovered there's a lot of other things that he, drew upon for inspiration. A lot of his influences were from, other cultures and other things from the Caucasus themselves, so that's kind of what I discovered as well. And, but yeah, certainly, another one of those interesting characters from the Caucasus.
Yeah, he's the author of Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. which is a fascinating book. It's an alternative
It's tough to read
mythology.
for most folks. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
tough book to read.
yeah. I never got through it. I have a bookmark, and
Yeah.
I've read like 600 something pages, which is like half
I
of the
think
book.
in the beginning of the book, he recommends you're supposed to read the book 3 times over. And I mean, he literally had to invent the whole language just to,
Right, right.
but it's an interesting book, certainly.
Oh, we have a call. We have Jafanza, if I'm saying that correctly, calling from North Carolina.
Okay.
Channel the universe by saying.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear you at the beginning. Could you start over, please, Jafanza?
Okay, I would like to channel the universe and say, "Evil be gone," 3 times. Evil be gone. Evil be gone. Channeling the universe every day, if possible. 11:45 a.m. every day. Evil be gone. Evil be gone. Evil be gone.
I like that.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Amen to that.
Thank you for the blessing. Yeah, there's a lot of evil just lurking around these days. There's so many heinous actions that are going on in New York City on a daily basis. It's pretty noticeable. New York has always been a rough place. There's more people getting pushed into the subway tracks than I've ever seen before. There's men randomly punching women is a thing
Yeah,
now.
I heard about that. Yeah.
There's elders being attacked. It's like, there used to be, I guess, I don't know, some concept of honor amongst thieves, but not anymore. It's just, you find the weakest person that you can attack and you just go ahead and attack the weakest target, elderly person, child. It doesn't seem to matter. Actually, one of the parents who I see on the subway with his son, as I take my son and daughter to school, said he got off the subway because a man had threatened to slice him and his son with a knife.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the
8 in the
daily
morning.
life, I guess, in New York, huh?
Yeah, 8 in the morning. This is what we pay our taxes for, and this is why they raise the price on the subway. And then they've implemented National Guards are now appearing in but they're clueless. They're just standing there in a military uniform. They don't even know what to look for. It's like, why don't you just dispatch the regular police properly? They're sitting there playing Pac-Man on their cell phones, basically. Why don't you look up and down the platform a little bit? They're not very well organized, but of course, I digress.
I think people are just generally frustrated, and they're just generally afraid, and the pressure that's been, the bolts are being cranked on them every day, even more and more, so they lash out, and there's just no real way to predict any of it, unfortunately. But I think that a lot of times, it makes great news. So there's a lot of sensationalizing and then putting these type of, this type of information in the daily news and the psyche of the people, basically just propagates it even more. So there's a lot of copycat things, and it becomes like, like amplified many times over. But, there's because the, shocking news sells, and they want to get the ratings, and they want to have the, I don't know, that just seems to be the motivation. But I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point that my friend Imani Uzuri made many years ago that stuck with me, which is that if you watch television, it teaches you how to rob a bank. It teaches you how to commit various crimes, like things that you'd never thought of before. You wouldn't even have a concept. They teach you, you go get a ski mask, you go do this, you have one guy hide in the trunk, another guy do this. It's like, wow, they give you a whole framework of how to go out and commit just, absurd crimes, and they put it in movies and television shows and,
amplifying it over and over,
it's an interesting term. They accused Trump at one point of stochastic terrorism. Like sort of randomly placed or sort of sprinkling about, this potential of terrorism that could pop up here or there at an unpredictable interval. But it seems like a lot of entities are indulging in that kind of stochastic effect of possible injury. But
I think they've weaponized misinformation in many ways. It's just like, it's so hard to discern the truth from fiction nowadays that becomes a weapon in itself. It's like people they can't tell what's real and what isn't real anymore. It causes more confusion, more conflict and more, disarray amongst the people, and great way to, come in and give them a single message and they all follow. It's a great system.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's evil genius, But
yeah, that's it. Marketing at its best.
but like our caller said, evil be gone. Evil be gone. So on that note, we're actually right at the end of the hour here. I want to thank
good to hear from you.
You too, my brother. I hope we can visit you out in Ireland one day. Last time we tried, we couldn't pull off the logistics, but we're going to make it happen. And send my love to the family. Thanks for joining me. The archive for this show.
Thanks for the interview. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. This show will be available on Monday, so everyone keep an eye out. And please,
send me a link.
I certainly will. And everyone, please spread the links to this program. These conversations are here as a permanent archive. Everyone have a beautiful weekend. Thank you for tuning in. See you next week. Peace and love.
Thank you. Bye.